Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're just going to give it a moment for everyone to log into the Zoom, and then we'll kick it off. Looks like we've got a good crowd jumping on. We'll just give it one more moment. Thank you all for joining us today. We're really excited for the session. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Courtney Brown. I'm a senior marketing manager here at EDB, and I'm going to be your host for today's webinar, Migrate Today, Proactive Steps to Unhook from Oracle. I'm joined by Ed Boyajian, CEO at EDB, and Craig Guarente, CEO and founder at Palisade Compliance. So before I turn it over to them, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. The presentation is being recorded. We're going to share the recording along with the slides after the broadcast. This is going to come to the email address that you used to register for the session today. All of your lines are currently muted, but if you have a question, please feel free to submit it in the question panel. We expect the presentation to take most of the time today, but we'll allot any extra time to Q&A. And if we're not able to answer your specific question, we'll follow up afterwards with any attendee that we weren't able to answer live. So now I'm going to hand it over to Ed to kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Courtney. And thank you all for joining us. We're delighted to have you here. I'm Ed Boyajian. I'm the president and CEO of EDB. And Craig, could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me today. My name is Craig Guarente, and I'm the CEO for Palisade Compliance.
Great. Delighted to be here with you, Craig, as always. So I wanted to start with a question. Why are you here today? And I think there are likely two broad reasons why you've joined us to kind of hear about how to migrate away from Oracle. One area is focused on the problems that you may be experiencing, and some of them that we hear most often relate maybe obviously to the Oracle costs that are painful for you and your organizations. The second we hear quite often is that the contracts are punitive and often have been oversold. You're using more than you actually need, or you're buying more than you actually need. And the third we hear quite often is around this threat or fear of an Oracle audit. And all of those problems are pretty negative, but they also act, as we've seen in our experience with many users who are migrating away, are the catalyst for change. And in many cases, a really strong catalyst. The other side of the equation is, I imagine many of you are here today because you're thinking differently. You're thinking about the opportunities that are in front of you for your companies. And those opportunities exist also, I think, on a dynamic continuum. And this certainly doesn't capture all of those potential benefits you might gain, but certainly driving out costs so that you can reapply economics to other parts of your business, more focused on growth. The notion that you can free your business from lock-in to a cumbersome vendor, and the latitude that provides you in some of your other strategic choices, and particularly that which relates to the ability to do transformation in your business, particularly around digital transformation. And I think those are the two reasons we often hear. But rather than guess at that, I think what we'd like to do is maybe have a quick survey. So Courtney, can you get a survey up so we can actually ask the audience?
Sure. So here we go. We're going to launch the first survey. Why are you looking for an alternative to Oracle's database? So we have a few different answers. Feel free to pop them in here. Maybe Oracle's costs are too high, licensing and compliance is too complex, the products just are not meeting your needs, or maybe you have a multi-vendor approach. So feel free to jump them in. We're going to wait for a majority of people to have a chance to answer, and then we'll share the results with everyone.
Craig, before we get it, we see the results. Any additional thoughts or comments on the kind of drivers for people to be here today in your view?
Well, I think these answers, sum it up. This is what we see. Obviously, our business is helping customers deal with Oracle contractually licensing. So we typically don't get the happy Oracle customer coming to Palisade looking to spend more with Oracle. So I think what I'm seeing a lot, especially this year, is cost. CIOs are under a lot of pressure to reduce those costs. And actually today, Oracle announces earnings. So if you want to know how much money you're giving Oracle, today's the day.
Here we go. We're gonna end the polling. I'm gonna share the results. Another good comment that came in live was that another option might be that they're trying to do open source as much as possible. There's an open source first initiative at the organization. So that was a really good comment.
Yeah, I saw that comment. That would be a great ad because I imagine many of you are experiencing that. So let's look at the results here. Maybe not surprisingly, the first is Oracle costs are too high. Second is we have a multi-vendor approach to technology. So diversifying away from Oracle. Oracle licensing and compliance is too complex is third. And then Oracle products don't meet our needs. This is pretty consistent with what we see here at EDB and how people think about use of Postgres. Craig, any thoughts on this? Any surprises?
Well, there's no surprises, right? We get a lot of clients who like the Oracle products, but they're just too expensive and they're too hard to do business with. So, and they don't want to be locked into any one vendor. It doesn't matter what that vendor is. So, multi-vendor approach and reducing costs, it's totally in line with what we're seeing on the business side.
Cool. I think this sets up the agenda really well and what we want to talk to you guys about today. So there are a few things we'll cover. We'll cover why migrate. We'll talk a bit about breaking free from the restrictions that you find in Oracle contracts and how that you can do that to save money. We'll talk about some new technologies to enable digital transformation, and we'll try to showcase some key customer examples. So let me just give you a quick snapshot on who EDB is. We are the leaders in Postgres. We think of ourselves as supercharging Postgres. We are the largest dedicated company to bringing Postgres solutions to enterprise customers. We support today over 5,000 customers around the world, and notably a significant number of Fortune 500 and Global 2,000 companies. We've had a long history of success. There aren't many other open source technology companies that can speak to this success. I'm enjoying I'm entering my 13th year in the company, and proud to say that the company's been incredibly healthy and strong through our growth. And that's really a representation of the importance of Postgres in the world. We have over 300 people dedicated and committed to Postgres as technologists, and over 500 people in the company. So delighted to share more about EDB in a few minutes. Craig?
Yeah, and then, Palisade Compliance, we've been in business since 2011. We just celebrated our 9th birthday. And I actually worked at Oracle starting in 1995, and I was there until 2011. I ran Oracle's contracts, business practices, compliance organizations, had 1,000 people working for me all around the world. Any agreements you signed with Oracle went through my team. And I left in 2011. At first, it was to help companies negotiate new deals with Oracle. But what I quickly found out in the market was that people had enough ways to spend money with Oracle, and they were looking for ways to not spend money with Oracle. So I pivoted the business, and now we help with audit defense, ULAs, cost reduction. I'm moving to the cloud. I need an open source strategy. How do I deal with my Oracle licensing? And we've got over 400 customers around the world now. We are 100% independent of Oracle. So we're not an Oracle partner or reseller. We're independent of everybody, right? So the only people who give us money are our clients. And the team we have now is full of Oracle expertise, like I have. Like I've been in this business now for 26 years, more than half my life. I've been dealing with Oracle contracts, and all we do is Oracle. So we don't help with Microsoft or SAP or anything like that. So we are the leading independent provider of these services.
And thanks, Craig. And I think first of all, we appreciate that experience you had at Oracle and all the good things that you're able to do now. We often, for those of you who may wonder, Craig's company and EDB, we work closely together and have for many years, where we have been providing database solutions as an alternative to Oracle. You can imagine that there's a really interesting intersection between the contract dynamics around Oracle relationships as well as the technology dynamics. And we find that customers have to not just re-engineer their tech, but also their contracts. So
yeah, and we are also EDB clients. We run our business on Postgres. So that's the database of choice for us.
Great. Courtney, let's keep going. So the question about, why migrate, we tapped on this a little bit, but I want to drill in a little further. If you look, what's happening. So why leave Oracle database? You guys know firsthand that from a technical perspective, Oracle does a lot of things very, very well as a database technology. And so, there's a strong and powerful base and connection to that tech in your infrastructure. But obviously we've seen this, you guys just referenced this, price has become incredibly burdensome for many companies. We see that especially now as you're endeavoring to take on bigger digital transformation initiatives that have to be funded somewhere in the business. In many of our customers, when we look close in at the overall IT expense as it relates to software, database still remains, if not the highest, the top 1 or 2 highest areas of software spend in a company. Now we know that's changing rapidly, particularly as you begin to re-platform. But one of the reasons that is changing is that what used to be highly differentiated and specialized features and technologies have become largely commoditized. And we'll talk a little bit about how Postgres now serves the vast majority of feature requirements that customers have around the world. Obviously, the contract terms we've kind of harped on, and we won't leave that alone because we still think that's a really important dimension of what's keeping you from leaving Oracle. I think the second, and this was brought up in the chat earlier, that many of you are endeavoring to have a much more robust open source strategy. I've been in open source now for over 20 years. I spent the first almost 7 years of my career at Red Hat before I left to come here and lead EDB. And so I've had kind of a close-in view of how open source has permeated through technology infrastructure in organizations. It's accelerated as we've seen more and more development being distributed into the business units and not just living alone in the domain of IT. And it's largely reported that 70% of new applications are now being developed on open source databases, notably Postgres. And so as we look inside of that, that gives you an opportunity to take more control of a really important part of your spend infrastructure. It also gives you an opportunity to reapply some of that cost to increase innovation in the technology and in your technology. Notably too, for open source projects, we're proud of the independent nature of Postgres, the vast number of developers that actually drive quite a bit of Postgres innovation, which accrues to you when you move to a database platform like Postgres. And of course, reducing the various dimensions of lock-in. The last area really relates to the re-platforming initiatives and the transformation initiatives that you're endeavoring to undertake. We see a lot of that obviously migrating to cloud, but not just to cloud. Notably, we see many of our customers taking up initiatives around containers. That's accelerated dramatically, especially in the past year. And those initiatives that are driving much more towards command of a utility-like infrastructure, whether that's in private cloud or public cloud. This is often an opportunity we see coupled with a shift to open source technologies. So that re-platforming and transformation gives you a chance to re-platform your database. So those are all things that we see driving companies to leave Oracle. And if you're in any one of those categories, but not yet very far along, you should know that you're not alone. and that companies like ours and Craig have expertise in helping you move through that smoothly and successfully. So what are some of the obstacles that exist in making a database move? You guys know them well. Migrations are inherently hard. In the world of Oracle, they're especially hard because so much of the application logic is dependent on an Oracle specific database, heavily dependent on stored procedures and functions that are Oracle specific. So that has historically made it quite hard. Part of what we're here to talk about is what we do at EDB with compatibility with Oracle to make that easier, making it such that those applications that are intimately intertwined with an Oracle database can be run on an EDB Postgres database without rewriting that app. And that's really kind of a key that unlocks that blocker that many of you experienced. And that in migrations, we often see, moving schema and data have always been the easier end of migrations, but moving the code is actually what's hard. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Oracle skills, another area, our customers are deep in their Oracle investment, which means they've got a lot of specific capability in Oracle. And our most successful customers have found, among other things, Postgres. Because of Postgres SQL relational nature, there's the transportability of skills between Oracle and Postgres is extremely high. And so many of the DBAs that we know who have worked in Oracle are very successful working inside Postgres. We make that easier again with compatibility, but this notion that skills are lost, we've proven successfully that that's not the case. Obviously, we keep talking about troublesome contracts and how complicated they are and how burdensome audits and disruptive those can be. And that gets in the way of migrations and I think you have to plan carefully for how you're navigating your Oracle contracts while you migrate. And then I mentioned the last one already, apps that are designed specifically to run on Oracle and EDB's compatibility is kind of unlocking that. So 5 ways to freedom. So first and foremost is technology. None of this can happen if you don't have a database that when you get there is a database that can meet all the requirements that you have. And Postgres offers that and dramatic savings that allows you to avoid the lock-in. It makes replatforming into hybrid and cloud environments easier because of the capabilities, because of the tech, and because of companies like EDB and Palisade to help you navigate not just the technical migration, but the contract migration. The fact is that as someone who's been in Postgres now almost 13 years, the rate of acceleration of innovation and feature development and performance enhancements it's increasing. And so Postgres is getting better faster. And that's largely because of companies like EDB who are solely focused on making that happen. In the community, and customers who are demanding things that Postgres do that make us work harder to make it better, faster. And all of this helps, I think, really make Postgres the new de facto standard open source database for transformation. And we've seen it time and time again where customers get there faster with Postgres. So you may be asking, why act now? Courtney, can you go to the next slide? We see this is as Craig mentioned, contract renewal season is upon us. You put that next to the amount of data growth that we know you're all experiencing and the desire to use the data effectively in your business to create change, whether that be growth or reduce costs or better customer support and service. But alongside that, licensing costs simply go up and not down with Oracle. And so I think that those transformation projects demand strategic attention, demand strategic action, and you've got to execute with a certain amount of discipline and expertise. And again, that's what EDB and Palisade are here to help you with. Let me jump in a little bit to EDB's process. So one of the ways, you can go to the next slide, Courtney. So we have a very systematic approach to helping companies migrate. We've been doing it now for the life of the company since 2004. So we're up to, we're in our 17th year of helping companies migrate away from Oracle. It starts with work that you can do independently, looking at the current Oracle implementations you have with an online diagnostic tool. We refer to that as our migration portal. You can actually evaluate the relative compatibility of your current databases and apps with Postgres. We help with that along the way. We'll get into a discovery process with you. You can, again, the portal will allow you to do a lot of this in a self-service way, but we'll help you with that discovery and start to begin to identify and triage and prioritize applications that can and should move first. Some are easier, some are harder, but we've got quite adept at helping you navigate how to think about the prioritization of an ultimate shift in the way you're approaching it. And not all our customers move all their databases. Many of them move some. In fact, most of them move some and don't move all. And I think that's proven to be a really effective strategy. Of course, then we help with the migration process itself. We'll talk about that a little bit more, which is assessing schemas, doing additional analyzing of compatibility, and then coming up with the level of effort that it'll take. And then we do the actual migration, or you do the migration and we help, and then get that to production. So it's a pretty straightforward process, and one that we've done a lot of work in perfecting. So there are best practices that really help reduce risk, increase the likelihood of return and creation of value, and get it all done faster. And one of the ways this all works is because we've built some compatibility technology that allows us to help you move not just the schema, not just the data, which you see a lot of vendors doing now. Notably, we've seen some migration tools that have emerged with AWS, and those move schema and data really well, but that's part of the way. In fact, it's not most of the work. Most of the work is actually moving the application and the code. And that's where EDB's compatibility really crosses into another dimension in enabling you to make and succeed at actually migrating away from Oracle. We've got some great examples of this. Here's one. This is a large multinational bank in Asia, and they operate across the Southeast Asia region. They've got, a little under 30,000 employees, branches across, and then they support 18 markets globally. But they were very specifically looking to find a lower cost alternative to Oracle, like many of you expressed. This was part of driving more profitability in the business, and driving a digital transformation centered on reduction of costs. So they built a pretty disciplined model and plan to migrate a couple of their most prominent applications. This particular application is called Finacle, which is one of their core banking finance applications. And the result is we've been systematically helping them move through more and more workloads across their platforms. They've saved, in a short amount of time, $800,000 in cost savings, and that's just migrating a portion of their overall database infrastructure. So there's much more savings to come in the months and years ahead. So it's a good example. We're trying to put a face on this for you so you can kind of relate to what are the tangible outcomes here? Is it, are these economics, do they really accrue, and do we understand how to help you realize the economic value? And I think that's what's particularly powerful about EDB Postgres and the work we've done over many years. But I think equally important about how Craig's built a business around really helping you navigate that other piece, that piece that relates to the contracts, which it's really hard to do if you don't put those two things together. And so, with that, I'd like to introduce my friend Craig back and to talk a little bit about what work he can also support you with.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate that. And, we're going to be focusing on the other side, two sides of that coin. The technology is one side, and then sort of the T's and C's with Oracle or the other side. But before we do that, I thought we would ask another poll question, sort of set the stage for the next part of this discussion. If you could please bring that up on the screen.
Sure, just launched our second poll. So this one's asking, describe your current contracting with Oracle. Again, a few different options. We have an active ULA. We had a ULA, but certified out of it. We never had a ULA, or I have no idea. So we'll just give a few moments for everyone to drop in their answers here. Just wait for a majority to vote, and then we'll share them out.
Sure, thank you. Now I know what I think the answer is going to be here, but Ed, what do you guys see when you're talking to your clients and they start talking about their Oracle licensing? What comes up?
So I think, one is there's a lot of uncertainty about what happens if I reduce, if I have it. Well, one is we don't have, everyone doesn't have a ULA, but those who do what are unclear on what happens when we reduce Oracle usage. Is this going to cost me net more? How do I navigate to get to a place where I actually end up spending less?
Got it. And we see a lot of that as well. People are just not sure. Most customers don't actually have their Oracle contracts. So they understandably don't know what's in them, but it's also what's not in the contract often that is what gets them in the end there. So what do we have as an answer here?
Sure, so I'm gonna wrap it up, and here are the results.
So it's a pretty even mix. Not surprising that some folks are saying, I don't know, right? And I remember our first big client, the one that I went to, first time I actually went onto a client site, and we met with their DBA team, and we gave them a training session on what their ULA said with Oracle. And the head DBA, who had been there almost 10 years, pulled me aside afterwards and said, Craig, thank you so much. I never knew what was in those contracts. No one ever explained them to me. I just thought it was unlimited so we could use everything. But in this case, we have 30% have an active ULA, a little bit they certified out of it. Some of them never had it, and then, like I said, most 40% don't have any idea. So I think it's usually 33, 33, 33. Either you're in an active ULA, you had a ULA, or you never had a ULA. That's typically what we see in terms of the clients that come to us. So if we could please go to the next slide. Perfect, thank you. When we talk about moving away from Oracle, I'm talking whether it's database, or if you want to move to third-party support, or if you just want to use a cloud solution that's not Oracle's cloud. So when I talk about moving away from Oracle, I'm talking about moving away from what Oracle wants you to do, right? Oracle wants to keep you in that cycle of constantly renewing your ULAs, of increasing your maintenance bill every year, of pushing you to Oracle Cloud, having you use your Exadata. So when you decide to do something different than that, you just need to be prepared. That's not something Oracle is going to help you do. We were on the phone with clients just yesterday. We want to move to ABC Cloud, and we called Oracle looking for help. And I was like, why did you do that? They're not going to help you do that, even though you're going to need more Oracle licensing. So when you're thinking about moving away from Oracle, the three things we believe you need, and Ed talked about these, at least the first two. The first is a technical alternative, right? We're not going back to ledger books. We're not going to rip out our systems and start using, notepads to do our work. So you need a technology, right? So Ed talked a lot about Postgres and how it fills the void that if you pull Oracle out, you can replace it with Postgres. So that's great. If you don't have an alternative database, there's nothing to move to. The second thing you need is the ability to reduce your Oracle costs and/or risks, right? So if your goal is to reduce your costs and you start adopting these new technologies, but you still have to pay Oracle that big bill, you're much less likely to move in that direction. Or if you're just worried about compliance, hey, I really want to do this thing over here, but I think Oracle's going to audit me over there, and I'm going to end up having to give them lots of money. So if you have number one, which is a technical alternative, and you have number two, the ability to reduce your Oracle costs and risks, then you'll have number three, which is momentum. We used to call it courage, we used to call it guts, but you need to be able to make that move. So if you don't have one or two, you're definitely not going to have three. Inertia is a very powerful force, and just continuing to write that check to Oracle every year. This is Oracle's Q4. So most of their, the biggest slice of their business is being renewed in the next less than 90 days. So, I don't know, 30–40% of their business happens in their Q4. So now is the time to really be looking at this and really focusing. You're going to be writing those checks very soon and, feeling that pain. So remember that as you're writing those checks and you feel that pain, to avoid that for next year. So technical alternative, reduce your costs and risks, build momentum. Next slide, please. Now, what's that number 2 there? Reducing your Oracle costs and risks. How does Oracle lock you in? This is a list of our experience working with clients. And you'll note the first thing I want you to notice is technology is at the bottom, right? It's not, oh, we have to have Oracle. No, you need something that does the functions and features that Oracle is doing for you. It doesn't have to be Oracle. Again, we were on the phone with a client yesterday and they were talking about, we have to have RAC. We have to have RAC. And we sort of delved, I'm like, do you need RAC or do you need the ability to do what RAC does? Oh no, we just need to sort of protect ourselves with that functionality. Okay, so remember that, right? Technology is way at the bottom, but the things that we need to get through are your contracts with Oracle. And I say what's in those contracts and what's not in those contracts. So many of the policies, Ed, you talked about the ability to reduce support costs. Oracle has some interesting policies in terms of repricing support, that if you have 100 licenses and you pay $1 million and you only need 70, you're still going to pay $1 million. So you need to work through that and sort of build a strategy to actually reduce your cost as you reduce your licensing. So gotchas in contracts we'll see is, customer definition. Oracle is really good about really defining the customer very narrowly. So if you do any mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, that brings in what Oracle calls a licensable event. We've had clients, I had one client announced a big merger, not over this holiday season, but a few years ago. And I called the client up at 9 a.m. on Monday, January 2nd, and he just laughed at me. He's like, Oracle's on the other line, right? So Oracle already called him before I had a chance to tell them, here's what Oracle's going to do. So just, understand that. Audits is obviously a prime way in which Oracle drives behavior. We're actually seeing, we saw a decrease in audits last year. We had the whole, and we're still obviously in the pandemic, but it was really hard for Oracle to drive audits when customers weren't in the office, when they were struggling for revenue and things like that. Well, sort of that temporary, kinder and gentler auditing from Oracle is definitely over. We can see customers hitting our website and coming for support, not just for database, but for Java and things like that. So, if you're out of compliance, it's very easy for you to be pulled back in. That famous Godfather, every time I try to get out, they keep pulling me back in. Well, that's one way that Oracle pulls you back in. Oh, great, you want to adopt that? But you owe me $10 million over here, and we can make this thing go away if you do what I want over there, right? So that is a common sales tactic that we see. Support is, support policies, those two lines go together. We talked about repricing, matching support, things like that. But I would, turn these around and look at them as, look at all the restrictions Oracle is putting on me in terms of the support they're providing. I mean, back when I started at Oracle, support was meant to protect customers, to reward them, to keep them in the fold and keep them using the products. Now it's almost been weaponized, right? You have to, if you're not on this version of Oracle, then you're not only going to pay 22%, you're going to pay more. You're going to pay extended support and sustaining support, and now market-driven support. There's literally 4 levels of support now where Oracle keep tagging on, right? If you drop support, you'll have to do, reinstatement fees and back support and things like that. Oracle has taken to changing their support policies where, they say you can only use Oracle in Oracle's cloud, right? They're not going to support you in a non-Oracle cloud. So really, turning that, I call it from a shield for customers to a weapon to attack almost the customer's budgets, which bleeds a little bit into Oracle's cloud policies. So these are all the things, they're not insurmountable. And we help clients every day drive through strategies to work through these. You just need to be aware of them. You need to be understand them. And it's not so much what's in the contract, but it's what's not in the contract. How is Oracle going to deal with you, given the nature of your agreements and your business model, your mergers and acquisitions, and all that fun stuff. And as you're making your move, we talk about the technology and the reducing costs and risks. It's really good idea to run these in parallel, right? Don't wait until the end. Don't figure out your technology and then say, oh, by the way, now I need to look at my Oracle contracts. And the reverse is true. Don't spend all your time worrying about your Oracle agreements. And once you sort of get through and have that strategy, then you start thinking about the technology. All of these things can be run in parallel and sort of meet later down in that journey that you're having. Next slide, please. So 3 things we recommend, and some of these, people might say, well, that's obvious. Thank you, Craig. Like number 1, read your contracts. 78% of our customers do not have their Oracle contracts. So when I say read your contracts, that's a little bit easier than hitting a button in your contracting application and printing out those documents or reading them on the screen. I mean, read your orders, read your support renewals, read your master agreements with Oracle. All of those 3 components, master agreement, order, support renewal, have bits of information that form your license entitlement, right? So it's really important that you understand all of those. We talked about technical support policies. This is key, particularly, the 40% of you who are looking at alternatives to reduce support costs. When we say reduce Oracle costs, it's support. That is the driver here. It's a $20 billion business for Oracle and 95% margin. So 5 pennies out of every dollar you give Oracle for support goes into the support. 95 cents goes back to Oracle. So everything Oracle does is to protect this annuity and now to convert that into a cloud annuity. So you really want to understand what's in your contracts, what's not in your contracts. And then you want to avoid the next big purchase, right? So you want to avoid having to do the next deal. And a great way to do that is have an alternative. It's to optimize your current licensing. So you deploy your licenses in a way that are most efficient, license optimization. It's making sure you're in compliance. It's making sure you can get out of your ULA and certify it. So when we think about, how do we reduce our Oracle costs? Well, the first step is always stop giving them more money, right? If you have to do that next big purchase, if you have to do that renewal, it's hard to reduce your costs when you keep giving Oracle more money and opening up new POs and sort of making more purchases. So if you can do all those 3, if you can understand your contracts, if you really dig into the Oracle support policies, and if you can do your license optimization and stay in compliance, that's when you'll be able to reduce your costs and risks with Oracle, right? That coupled with your technology alternative like EDB is what will give you the momentum or the courage or the freedom, maybe the freedom's a better word, to make that move. And obviously we can help you with all this stuff. Next slide, please. So here we have a great example. Actually, one of the first clients that we worked with EDB, big, huge technology firm, having in the middle of an Oracle ULA, actually towards the end of it, the last year, and we worked with them on the licensing side, on the contracting side, to really put them in a good position to certify out of their ULA. And one of the ways they were able to do that was to have an alternative. So they, I'm not going to get into the weeds of how to maximize your ULA investment, but the ability to certify and not have to do that next ULA and using alternatives is what gives the customer, again, the freedom to certify and get out of that contract, right? So when we look at the cost savings, this is cost avoidance for this customer. Their Oracle support costs stayed the same because they wanted to continue with that, but they avoided that next big purchase. And that next big purchase, actually, they've avoided a couple of big purchases with Oracle just by optimizing what they already bought and then using something different, something new for new implementation and sort of moving workloads around onto Postgres. So that's been a big success for us. We also help them renegotiate their license agreement, their audit clauses. Of course, Oracle came back and challenged their certification, but we were able to defend that, not a problem. But this one is a great example. We've got lots more here. I think, most of our customers, when we look at sort of that answer, we have a multi-vendor approach. They're all in the same, you're all doing the same thing, right? Nobody wants to be tied to one vendor. You don't want to be a complete red stack or whatever stack. You're looking for different vendors to meet different needs. And we just help getting your contracts aligned with that goal. Next slide, please. So this one, we just put a list here of how Oracle does their licensing. So the first one, per core perpetual, actually it's worse than per core, because if you're virtualized, Oracle wants you to buy everything. So if you're using VMware and you have a big vCenter, you're even paying for cores that you're not using, which is unbelievable. We have a whole other topic there to discuss. And then you've got obviously the support. If you have old licenses, you think you were paying 22% for support, you could be paying up to 30, 35%, because there's a 3 or 4% increase every year on that support. It's hard to reduce your support costs. If you turn off support and turn it on later, there's reinstatement and back support fees. And then the last one, the virtualization and hard partitioning. So, that's how Oracle is really good at monetizing for their benefit, their license agreements. And then on the right there is EDB, Postgres, and how they do it. So Ed, do you want to talk about how EDB compares with Oracle licensing for these categories?
Yeah, sure, Craig, thanks. I mean, in a nutshell, because our unit of measure is a virtual core, and we charge on a subscription basis. So, for an annual subscription, you get not only the tech, but all the support and maintenance, updates and upgrades that go with that. So you're getting the technology plus all the other things. And because that's a subscription, there is no concept of a perpetual license. You pay for the software you use as you use it. And so all those things that become tripwires in an Oracle perpetual license kind of model just don't exist in EDB's subscription model. And I think that's the kind of flexibility and latitude that today, frankly, and I think most companies would agree, this has become the new normal. I can say, looking back, almost 20 years ago, when we were evangelizing subscription licenses at Red Hat, that was new. That was like new information. But today, it's quite normal, and I think our customers just don't have to experience any of these kind of negatives when you use an EDB subscription. That's when you pay for it, and you don't pay before, after, or any other time. And it makes it, I think it makes it quite compelling.
Awesome. And then I think we've got some time for some questions from the audience.
Yes, exactly. So we're going to open it up live to questions. If you haven't had a chance to enter your question yet, feel free to put it in the panel. I also like to take this time to remind anyone that might have jumped on a little late. Don't worry, we've recorded the session, and we'll be sending everyone that registered a copy of this recording and the slides after the fact to the email that you used to register. So with that, let's see what questions have come in. It looks like the first one, this one came in while Craig was presenting, says, when we do get to the point of being able to turn off Oracle completely, how is the best way to tell Oracle that we wish to terminate our agreements?
So if we're focused on database here, obviously you want to understand your contracts with Oracle. If you really are turning off Oracle and everything in those agreements, my recommendation is to turn them off from a technology standpoint, to actually stop using Oracle, and then notify Oracle that you're terminating those licenses and you don't need those support renewals. Don't do it beforehand, right? While you're thinking about it, while you're in the process of it, right? If I just put myself back in the footsteps of an Oracle sales rep. If I'm an Oracle sales rep and my client comes to me and says, I'm thinking about doing this and I'm going to stop giving you money. Well, I'm going to do something to prevent that person from stop giving me money. So you really want to make sure you've gone down that path, again, from a technology standpoint, and your contracts, right? Because sometimes you buy database on the same contracts, you have middleware, and so there's some complexity there, or you've prepaid for certain services and fees. So you want to make sure you get the value out of what you've already paid, but definitely do it first. and then tell Oracle.
Yeah, and I just comment, and I think Dan, that's a good question, Dan. I think a lot of, we don't always see it as quite that binary, frankly. We see that there's a, depending on the magnitude of your Oracle installation and how many areas of the business it really touches, we more often than that see a kind of more systematic process of moving away. And honestly, that's where it really does become important to understand your contracts and know what that nuance means when you're kind of doing it piece by piece. So there really are two approaches, though. I mean, if you can get to the point where you've really moved all of the workloads and they're up and running, that's great. And oftentimes we help companies in exactly that mode. In almost every case, they get up and running on a Postgres alternative in parallel to their Oracle database, and then at some point do a hard cutover. That's usually, and I'm sorry, that's always ahead of them making any contract changes.
Yep.
Great. So feel free to continue submitting your questions. We did have a question come in earlier, Ed, that you might be able to cover. So people are familiar with what PostgreSQL is, but could you just give high-level overview, like what is EDB Postgres Advanced Server?
Sure. So just kind of big picture. So we are first and foremost a Postgres technology company. So for those of you who aren't familiar with EDB, you should know that. We are the most significant contributor in the community to the advancement of Postgres, albeit we're not the majority, and that's a good thing. Postgres is an independent open source project, a lot like Linux, actually, and that is its strength. But we are very prominent in that community. So many of our customers use community Postgres, and we support them in that endeavor. Our advanced server product, we've done some enhancements to Postgres, particularly in the areas of Oracle compatibility. So we've added some intelligence to Postgres that allows it to, basically, run Oracle style stored procedures and triggers against a Postgres database successfully. And that's the heart of it. There are other technical enhancements that we've made inside of our advanced server that aren't specific or related just to Postgres in some areas of security and some areas of scalability. So that's what you get. Our advanced server package and our standard edition also includes a portfolio of tools to help you manage your Postgres deployment at scale. And those are actually quite important because there's the database server, but those tools actually go beyond, and they're, notably things in the area of replication that are really important to our customers, especially those that may be leaving a rack environment, and then, enterprise class management, backup and recovery tools, all the things you need to run any database at scale. And they are, there are examples of those kind of tools that you might otherwise get from Oracle or another vendor, but many of our customers look to EDB because we offer that kind of full solution, and because we're so intimately involved in the community, all of our Postgres solutions are the most current version of everything that's available from the community in Postgres.
Great, thanks for providing that overview. Let's see, we just had one more question come in. Let me look at it quickly. It says, as we're thinking of migrating off Oracle to open source solutions, what are your experiences with third-party maintenance offerings to bridge the gap short or long term? So this sounds like a support question as you're working through your migration project.
Yeah, so we have lots of customers who go that path, right? We see, for example, customers are moving off PeopleSoft, right? And they want to move to Workday, right? They're not going to continue to pay Oracle 22% maintenance for PeopleSoft. So they go to a company like Rimini Street for maintenance while they're making that transition. Same thing with database. I think it's a great option. And it's something we evaluate or we tell every client to evaluate. Look at getting, if you are moving away from Oracle and you want to reduce your spend, that is an option, right? It's not for every customer, but it is for a lot of customers, right? So we see more and more. I think, 9 years ago, I knew nothing about third-party maintenance. Now I know a lot, only because my clients are the ones who say, hey, we're thinking about doing this, and they've brought us into that. So, you need to fully understand what third-party support companies can do, independent providers, and what they can't do, and then model your business operations to fit those services. It's a great, and I know that these folks say we'll reduce your cost by 50%, right? So if you're spending $5 million a year on Oracle, you spend 2.5 doing that while you're making your transition to something else. So it's a great stopgap.
Okay, great. I think those are all the questions that we're going to be able to answer live today. So thank you again, Ed and Craig, for presenting today. Thank you all for joining us live. We are so happy to have you here, and we will be sure to follow up with the recording. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Courtney.